Hi, I'm Tom Eschen, and welcome to the award-winning Power in Politics podcast, the conversation about the issues that are impacting you the most with the people that are making the decisions, the advocates that are calling for change, and everyone in between and holding them accountable along the way, too. Today, we speak with New York State Comptroller Tom DiNapoli, fresh off of receiving the Democratic nomination for New York State Comptroller once again in the city of Syracuse just a few weeks ago now. In this conversation, DiNapoli speaks about his reasons for running again. He's been in office now for almost 20 years at this point. He tells us why he's been in office so long and what he wants to do next. We get into audits when it comes to Medicaid, the Public Service Commission, CDPAP. We also talk about the New York State Pension Fund, investing and divesting, and some of the questions that have come up from opponents here as we get into this primary, potentially here in the month of June. As you might have seen, we've spoken to some of those candidates and potential opponents on our website, cbs6albany.com, or as a podcast, as always. And you can watch and listen to these full interviews as well on our CBS 6 Albany YouTube page. Welcome once again to Power in Politics. We're joined today by Tom DiNapoli, the New York State Comptroller. Thanks so much for coming on. We appreciate it.
Great to be back with you.
Obviously, you look at yourself in this campaign mode, as we approach these midterm and the primary as well this year for you. You've been in office now nearly 2 decades. If you look back, how have things changed over the course of your career here while being the State Comptroller?
Well, I think in terms of politics, unfortunately, everything has become so much more polarized and divisive. The impact of social media and the immediacy of having to respond sometimes to the craziest things makes it more challenging, I think. It would be fair to say that given some of the economic uncertainty, given just some of the upheaval we constantly see, largely coming out of Washington, I think that people are more anxious generally in different ways. So I think in terms of when you talk to folks out there, there's a lot of concern, a lot of unease, and that makes perhaps a bit more challenging to kind of cut through all of that. Especially for a position like controller, where most people aren't quite sure, what the job is. It's the title of the job doesn't really define, what the responsibilities are. So I would say it's a more challenging climate generally, for forces very much beyond any one individual's control. But on the other hand, that creates opportunity also to really get out there, explain to people the relevance of being chief fiscal officer for the state, remind people about at a time where folks are very much wanting more transparency and openness and accountability from government. That's exactly what this job entails. So while it may be a more challenging atmosphere out there, I think it's also an opportunity to reassure people that, in fact, we have in New York State this very important position of controller that very much responds to many of the needs that they have in terms of the issues that they want to see addressed.
Some of those, the current situation in society, you could even call it, is that a reason why you're still here, still engaged in this role, and now looking and running again?
Well, I've always believed public service is a calling. I've never viewed it as a job. I worked in the private sector, for 10 years before I was in public office, and I had the privilege to represent my community in the state legislature for almost 2 decades. So when I had the opportunity to become controller, remember my predecessor had to resign, there was a scandal, we had to clean up the office. But from the moment I started as controller, I understood that this was a very important position, perhaps often underappreciated. And I've never been one to walk away from a fight. And I think government still needs people that are in it for the right reasons. I don't view my work as a job at all. I think it's a very important public service. Look, I'm a kid of the late '60s, early '70s. I mean, the Kennedy brothers, Martin Luther King. Those are the voices that I responded to, even though I grew up in a good Republican family on Long Island. But I felt that those leaders spoke to my heart and my head, which really spoke to the need for us to create a better world. And so to me, serving in a government position, in my case, fortunate enough to be an elected position, it really is an opportunity to make, in this case, New York State, a better place. And I think with all the challenges that we're facing right now, it would be easy to say at this stage of the game, well, I'm done with this, let someone else do it. But just the opposite. I think the experience that I have, the proven record that I have, the steady hand that I've demonstrated in this position, despite all the ups and downs of New York State government, I find it somewhat curious. I get criticized for being in office for a long time. Well, I'm in office a long time because I keep getting elected. And I'm in office a long time because, unlike so many other people in statewide positions, I haven't had to resign. You know, you look at the turnover, whether it's governor, attorney general, lieutenant governor, leaders in the legislature. How many of them have had to resign? Some of them have gone to prison. Well, you know what? I run a clean shop because I always understood from the beginning, especially because of how I came into the office when my predecessor had to resign, that ethics and integrity are the most important quality that you have to bring, as well as independence in this role. So my longevity is not because I am just occupying space. It's because I've been working hard, doing the job. People may not agree with every single thing that I do, but nobody could say that I don't run a clean and honest shop. And given all the challenges we're facing, especially coming out of Washington and the Trump policies that really are so disruptive to our state and to the people in our state, I think I'm the best choice to keep things going in the right direction at the Comptroller's office.
Let's continue with the auditing side,
Sure.
the oversight, the reports that you do of course, the state agencies and a variety of manners. I do want to get specific here because I think you just touched on it a bit, that the calls for transparency, the calls for, you see it at the federal level, you've heard the whole DOJ, waste, fraud, and abuse.
Right.
Let's clear that up. And then Minnesota as well, some of the claims out there when it comes to some of their programs. So that gets me to Medicaid. And I know that you've done several audits over the years. I counted some of them, at least double digits on a yearly basis.
Yep.
What have you found with Medicaid in terms of how it's operating today? And under that guise
Sure.
of questioning and questions that people might have about how that program is run right now.
Well, we have a dedicated team of auditors that focus just on
Yep.
Medicaid. And as you point out, that's been an ongoing priority area. Why? It's one of the biggest cost centers of the state budget, right? Yeah. It's healthcare through Medicaid and education. What we found, and if you add up over the past year or so, the cost analysis of the audits and what we found in terms of potential for savings, it's about $1 billion just in this 1 year. So what we found is that there are many instances where the Medicaid program is just not administered as effectively as it should be. So you have some cases where there are reimbursements being given out for services that should not be reimbursed, people who really weren't eligible. In some cases, a double billing, so in effect a double payment. Some cases where folks should have been on Medicare versus Medicaid. Medicaid has state spending, Medicare is all federal. So we found many opportunities for cost savings, and in many cases, it's important to point out, would not hurt people getting the service, right? It's still a very important service that many New Yorkers, I think it's about 35% of our population is somehow connected to the Medicaid program. So we have found many instances where the program could be more efficient, missing out on certain rebates, for instance, that we're entitled to on drugs. So we do these audits, and very often it does then compel the Department of Health to implement our changes or to recover the money that we had said the state should be entitled to, and that's a net gain, for the state and ultimately for taxpayers. So Medicaid audits are going to continue to be a big part of our responsibility. Parallel to that, we also have our investigations unit, right? As part of the counsel's office. So sometimes through an audit, or sometimes through a tip we may get, on our fraud hotline, we've also found instances where people are ripping off the system, right? So what I was talking about earlier with the audits, it's identifying opportunities for efficiency and cost savings. When you find people corrupting the system, right, in effect stealing money, we get our investigators on the job, and just in the past couple of months, we had a case in Schenectady County and another case in Orange County, multi-million-dollar Medicaid transportation businesses that were really getting reimbursed for transportation that wasn't even provided. Very complicated scheme to defraud the system. In both of those cases, when we find those kinds of abuses, we work them with law enforcement. So as the controller, I can't prosecute. I'm not law enforcement. So we then partner, in this case with the Schenectady, in these cases with Schenectady DA's office and the other case with Orange County DA's office. And then our auditors, our investigators work with the district attorneys. And in both of those cases, arrests were announced and people are going to be held accountable. The trials haven't happened yet. So it's really two areas on Medicaid that we look at. One is, how do we find more efficiency? And that's largely the work of the auditors. And then we have our investigations unit. So when there's actual fraud and stealing from the program, we then work with law enforcement. Could be a local DA, could be just James, the Attorney General's office. It could be U.S. Attorney's office. There are different jurisdictions that we may work with. But I certainly want to assure your viewers that Medicaid is a high priority area for us to look at because of the billions of dollars every year that's spent there. And it's very important that we not waste money there, especially because, as you know, the Trump changes coming out of the federal bill over the summer is targeting a state like New York, big cutbacks in health care, big cutbacks in Medicaid, potential for many New Yorkers to lose their health insurance coverage, which is not a good situation. So all the more reason, if we're going to have less money coming in to spend on this health care program, we better make sure that we are spending the money appropriately. And as I said, to our auditors particularly, we often find ways to save money without hurting people or denying service.
In that scope, how big was CDPAP? Because that obviously got all the headlines because of the conversation of where things went and the decisions behind all of that.
That's a whole nother
It
topic.
is. It was a very big one.
Well,
it has been.
And this was one of those, how do I put it, unfortunate situations where we were specifically written out of our normal role to review a program like that. It was a big contract. You know, everybody understands that service and providing care at home is a great concept.
What do you mean by written out of that?
Well, literally written out in the legislation that authorized the change in the program. So it was part of budget negotiations last year.
Yeah.
And normally we would have the ability to review the contract and sign off on it before it would be given out. The statutory language said the controller's review is exempted from this particular contract. So when all the controversy was, and everybody's coming to me saying, well, why'd you let it happen? Well, we were specifically taken out of the process. Now, would we have done something different? Who knows? I don't know. But we were specifically, by statute, written out of reviewing it. So now everybody's saying, well, you should be auditing it. Well, you know, it's a relatively new change. They've been implementing it. Perhaps at some point we will. But you know, with an audit, you're always looking backward. I would have preferred having the opportunity for us to look forward when the contract first came up to see whether there's been some suggestion that the procurement wasn't fair. I'm not saying whether it was or wasn't. We weren't involved in it. But had we had that opportunity to review it, then for sure we would have only approved it if it was a fair procurement. Did we get the best value, for the state? Again, that would have been part of what we would have looked at. Did we think the plan was workable? We were cut out of that process. So, so now there's still, let's just say there's mixed reviews. The administration will say that it's working effectively, that people are still getting the service and that there are cost savings happening as well. Others are saying folks aren't getting paid and some people don't have service. The legislature has hearings on it. Whether there may be further changes, that may be part of the budget negotiation. But that was, I think, a case, and we've seen it over the years, not just with this administration, but with many, where they will often take out the controller's review of the contract, which to me makes no sense. We're set up to provide another level of scrutiny and accountability. I think it would benefit any administration to have us do the sign-off first, because then if people complain about it, they say, well, the controller looked at it, the controller said it was fine. So this was one of those cases where, to me, it made no sense for us to be cut out, but we were.
Because, so that was outside of the parameters when the governor signed the restoration of those powers, some of those powers, of your powers back in 2022.
Which we appreciated,
yeah.
Right? So the previous administration wrote us out of a lot.
It was like 2011.
Yeah. Now then, and fortunately, Governor Hochul and the legislature put us back in. That hasn't stopped them from, in certain cases, writing us out
making
again.
exceptions.
And this was one. I'll be honest with you, Tom. In this current budget, there are also some other changes that we're not happy with that would raise thresholds on the contract, which will then cut us out of much of the review that we've done in a number of circumstances.
Because that was then when she signed that in 2022, that was one of her chapter amendments as well, right? When she signed that legislation, did raise some of that threshold already? I think.
Yeah, but this is much more dramatic. What's being
Okay.
proposed this year.
Okay.
So I'm hoping the legislature will push back on that. Again, we're set up to provide that review and accountability. It helps taxpayers and it helps the administration, because then you get another set of eyes looking to make sure that the contract is appropriate, the money's being spent wisely. We'll see how it plays out this year, but there's always that effort to sideline our office, and much of the reason behind it is frankly not based on fact. So, well, the controller's office slows down the process. The reality is many of the contracts that are delayed is because the agency that's letting the contract has taken a very long time to get a final sign-off. And by the time it comes to us, we do a very fast turnaround. Most contracts are turned around in our office within 2 weeks of when it comes to, usually even faster than that. So even though we have a statutory window of 90 days, it's unless it's a very complex procurement or contract, we will turn it around in 2 weeks or less. So I think it's kind of a bogus argument to say that our review slows down the efficiency of government. In fact, our review provides accountability, assurance that the state is getting the best bang for its dollar, the taxpayer interests are being protected. That's what we're set up to do. So I'm really hoping that there'll be no more one-offs to write us out, no more extreme raising of thresholds that eliminates our review. Because then people say, well, you can audit it after the fact. Well, once the contract is let and once the money's spent, for us to audit after the fact and say, well, you woulda, shoulda, coulda, that doesn't provide the kind of protection. We can always audit something after the fact, but how much more powerful and appropriate it would be if we could review before the money goes out the door. It's great to say after the fact how it could have been done better, but let us at the front end make sure that we're getting the best deal for the state.
Along the lines of that conversation, there's been questions in this primary about leveraging the power of the office. Would you then respond with what you just said, all those different factors of why aren't you compelling these agencies more so to take upon these recommendations instead of just saying, listen to me?
Yeah, well, because it's interesting, the folks that want the job don't seem to understand the job. If you want to force the agencies to do something, you should run for governor. Right? You shouldn't be running for controller. The controller is set up to be an independent oversight role. The controller does not have the enforcement power, right? That's how it's set up. You elect the governor and the legislature to set policy and to make law. You elect the governor to appoint the administrative heads of agencies and then to fire an agency head if you don't like what they're doing. But that's where the power is to direct the agency. So the strength of this office is our ability to, in the case of an audit, make recommendations. And very often our recommendations will be adopted. In some cases, an agency will push back and say, no, we don't agree with that. We will go back after we do an audit and do a follow-up. To what extent did the agency implement our recommendations? The power that we have is our credibility in terms of providing an objective review. We're not a partisan office in that sense. Our auditors they're not political appointees, right? They're trained professional auditors and accountants and CPAs. The strength of what they do is in the credibility of their work. But we don't have, and I don't think anybody would give us the power to, in effect, override what an agency does. We can only make a recommendation. But because our recommendations are sound, are thoughtful, make sense, in many, if not most cases, they're actually adopted. But we cannot say, agency, you must do what we have to say, because we're not elected to do that. We're not like the uber czar of state government. And so our credibility in providing that accountability is the strength and the wisdom of what we're recommending. The way some of the folks that want this job, they think they're going to come in and be running state government. That's not what this job is.
I think the notion would be to politic your way around it, right? To engage more with leaders and to be able to say, hey.
What does that mean?
That's just having those discussions.
Those are words. No, we do that already. Those are words. They really think that they're going to be more credible than what my team of auditors have been? I doubt it. They may think they can make a lot of noise, but how you get marginalized in the controller role is if you are viewed as just someone who's just standing on a soapbox just trying to get attention, right? The strength of how I've managed the office is the credibility of our work. And yeah, we do press conferences and press releases. Would I like sometimes folks like you to cover more of what we do? Absolutely. But it's not about yelling and screaming. It's not about the noise, because I think that's how that's how someone will be viewed as just someone who's just crying wolf and
Well,
not really credible.
I think you did bring up just shortly ago about engaging with law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is an element of it. Yeah, I don't think a lot of people know that actually happens, of engaging and having your investigations unit work with those types.
When we have a case in the sentencing, we always put out a press release. We've had a lot over the past year. We've gotten back in restitution of taxpayer dollars from these cases well over $100 million. We're probably up to now about 300 arrests, maybe more, of elected officials, appointed officials, heads of nonprofits managing public money. So we've had a significant impact. But I don't control the press, right? If I was in charge of you, I would say, Tom, you better be blaring to everybody this latest arrest that came out of one of our audits. Again, we were talking earlier about all the noise that's out there these days. Every day there's some new craziness, largely coming out of Washington. Do you think a controller's audit is going to get the top of the news? Usually it's not going to.
As Regis Philbin once said, I'm only one man, Tom. But yes, that's a fair argument. Real quick, one more, because I know we have to get to the retirement fund here,
sure.
The pension fund, but because it's been brought up as well, the Public Service Commission. That's not only been brought up in this race, been brought up outside of that as people are frustrated over their utility costs. I went through, it looks like the last time was 2024, the last time the office they audited the Climate Act and the goals behind that. And there was cost attached to that, questions about that. What did you find there, and is this something that you were looking to address moving forward again, and looking at it again now that we've heard more questions about this, and if it's even feasible to be able to comply with these goals?
Yeah, I mean, we
you did another report recently too.
We're always auditing the PSC on different aspects. Yeah, I mean, in terms of the climate issue, New York State has very ambitious goals to deal with climate, and climate change is real. I don't agree with those that deny it. And I think it's appropriate that New York has a very ambitious agenda to lower greenhouse gas emissions and be part of that transition to the low carbon economy. It's unfortunate that at the national level, we're going in the opposite direction, right? But we looked at the PSC and NYSERDA, particularly the PSC, which is really charged to be working, with the utilities to make sure that we're on a path to meet those goals. And what we found was that we're falling way short in the planning to meet those very ambitious goals. And it was interesting, as we were completing the audit, the PSC then announced that they're falling short meeting the planning.
Yeah.
So, they kind of tried to get ahead of us before we put it out, which is fine. I think, again, it's another indication of when we do an audit that is impactful. Very often, what will happen is an agency will try to get ahead of us and they'll put out their own message.
Yeah.
So, look, are there costs attached with that? Absolutely, there are. But we're continuing to look at other PSC programs, as we always have done. Here's one of the challenges. People don't realize the Public Service Commission is set up to regulate our utilities. That's what they're in business for. People are frustrated. I got my bill. I'm in the LIPA service area down in Long Island. It's the highest bill I've ever gotten. Well, what a shock. We know costs are going up, and we know how cold it's been. So, when people say, we're frustrated, and then some folks come and say, well, you've got to investigate this, the PSC is set up to do exactly that. And in fact, under New York State law, there's a requirement that once every 5 years, an independent audit has to happen on all of the private utilities. And the PSC uses that information as part of the rate setting process. The State Senate the other day just did a series of bills to try to change some of the law. There have been proposals to change, the profit level that the private utilities can have. Keep in mind, the state controller has no authority over a private company, right? So you got some folks, well, you've got to be investigating National Grid, let's say. Well, we can't investigate National Grid. It's a private entity. Our role is on the public side. So we can audit the PSC, and we do, but the PSC has their own laws that they're governed by that they have to follow, and then they publish, they're quasi-judicial proceedings that are then made very public. I think it's an appropriate question to say, is the PSC doing all that they can? And should there be some change in the legal structure in terms of how they account for the expenses that happen? But, what we have been looking at, and we have talked about energy costs in the past, utility costs. if we could provide more clarity as to what's driving some of these costs, we'll certainly try to do that, to be responsive to what people are asking. But I think there's an expectation that we, again, have some uber role over private companies. And I think it's a little disingenuous when some of that comes from the legislature, because they're the ones that set up the ground rules on
Right.
on the laws that govern how the PSC handles a rate case. That's where the change can happen. Or if people feel the PSC is not doing its job, the governor appoints the members of the Public Service Commission. Well, maybe there should be some changes there, but that is beyond the purview of what the controller could do. I'll tell you this funny thing. I'll wrap up on this. Somebody came up to me once at an event not that long ago, complaining about some issue they had with a hospital on reimbursing for healthcare, and kept insisting that I had to look at it. I said, well, I don't have any, I can't help you with a hospital charge. Well, you're the controller. You control everything, don't you? That gets back to what I said earlier. The title doesn't lend itself to people understanding. No, I don't control the PSC. I don't control utilities. We can help shine a light on what's going on, but we cannot change that. Others have that responsibility. And I think sometimes they throw things our way because they don't want to deal with it.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get now to the New York State Common Retirement Fund. That's another big in your purview.
Very important responsibility.
So for everyone that doesn't know, what is it?
So
I think that's, like you said,
Yeah.
that's part of educating
Yeah,
people
they may
here.
hear about the CRF, the Common Retirement Fund. So that's the money, the fund that provides for the retirement security, the pensions for state workers, wherever they are in New York, or local government workers outside of New York City. New York City has its own pension funds. And for non-teaching school personnel. So then there's also the teachers' retirement system. So in New York, we in effect have the state fund that I'm trustee for, the teachers' retirement fund where I have a seat on the board, and the 5 New York City funds. So the money in that pool is a combination of employee contributions and employer contributions, and then we invest the money, and so the investment return goes into that as well. So it's one of the largest public pension funds in the country. It's well managed, well invested, and that's how we're able to provide the retirement security for the retirees of today and the folks who hope to retire in the near future.
And $294 billion right now, is that right?
Yeah, actually, we're probably now at about, as of December 31st, a little over 297 billion. So we had a good third quarter. We value the fund on March 31st, so we've still got a few weeks before we see what the final number will be for the year. Last year, March started out great, and then the president announced his Liberation Day and the tariffs, and the markets, remember, went way down.
Yeah.
And so we got caught in that. March 31st last year, we ended up with a 5.84 return. Our long-term goal is 5.9. So basically, we were on target with that. The markets bounced back later in April and May and June. So I'm hoping there's no March surprise. The Ides of March don't always do well for us. So certainly, the way the numbers have been so far this year, we will have exceeded our 5.9% long-term goal. And that'll be good news for the fund, but also that's part of what goes into the calculation that we charge the government employers, right? So that contribution rate is not only determined by investment return, but that is a big piece of it.
Why aren't you getting more out of that fund? I've heard some say that you should be getting double digits compared to other states. California gets 12, 13%.
Well, it
S&P
depends on the
500
year.
was 15% last year.
But see, that's the problem. You compare our March 31st date with their March 31st date, right? So one of the problems we have with comparisons is that we're probably the only fund that values on March 31st. So most pension funds either have a fiscal year that starts July 1st or January 1st. So compare us, you'd have to recalculate all their numbers.
Yeah.
Some years we do have double digits. Some years we finish ahead of them. The bottom line is this: we are probably now about 95% funded. So compare us to California. Compare us to New York City. We are a better funded pension plan, and I think that's the key point. You have to look at not just how big you are, or year to year how much money you may have in return, but how well funded are you? Because that's how you provide the retirement security. So we always make sure, besides having smart investments and good returns, that if we have to raise the employer contribution rate, we will, because that's how we keep the plan well funded. Those states that have difficulty with their budget, difficulty doing their state borrowings or their credit rating, it's often because of unfunded pension liabilities. We've always had the discipline to maintain our fund. But you look at our numbers, you go back, I don't know, 20 years or plus, 75% of how we pay for the pensions is based on investment return. So again, I don't know what March is going to bring in 2026, but at the rate we're going, you're going to see a very strong number in terms of returns. We compare very favorably with other pension funds. You look at our long-term numbers, you look 5, 10, 15 years, we beat our goal of 5.9. So it's very easy for someone to say, well, if I was looking backwards with what I know today, I would invest this and that, and I would make more money. Well, you don't invest by looking backwards. When you invest, you're looking forward. And again, our effort is to be as close and as consistent to that 5.9% goal. That's what our financials are based on. We don't want to take undue risk. Some people say we should have more money in the stock market. Yeah, that's all well and good, except when you have, as we went through when I started as control, the global financial crisis where the markets tanked, and suddenly it's like, well, why do you have so much money in the stock market? The stock market is a piece and the biggest part of our portfolio. But we have a portfolio that's diversified, as all large institutional investors are, because you don't want to have all your eggs in one basket. I don't think anybody does it with their investments, personally. So while it's true, most of our money is in the stock market, and the stock market is doing really well right now, and it's very easy to say, put all of your money in the stock market. We're not looking to beat the market. We're looking to do well enough to meet our numbers. And so we have a significant amount of money in fixed income. And then we have our private markets, because we understand that if you tie it all to the stock market, all well and good when it's doing great, but when it tanks, then you really have a problem. And we're looking long term, how do we provide that retirement security, not just for the people who are retiring today, not even for the people who are working for New York State or local government today. It's for the man or woman who's starting to work tomorrow in New York State. And they're not going to be retiring for 25, 30 years. That's who we're thinking about when we have the kind of diversified portfolio that we have. We just had our fifth independent fiduciary review of how we're managing the fund. And we got high marks once again that we manage the fund with the best interest of our members. We carefully scrutinize the fees that we have to pay when we do pay fees, particularly on the private markets. And our asset allocation is consistent with what other large pension funds have. So we are in strong shape, we're in good shape, and we stack up very well compared to our peers.
So, you think about where you invest, right? And obviously that can be, questioned for some, and that came up in one of the other conversations I had with over the course of this campaign when it came to Palantir. Mm-hmm. And I think maybe if people don't know, there are contracts coordinating with ICE and everything going on in the political sphere about that. Why invest there? Why invest with Palantir? And I know that because I reached out to your office about it, sure. And you guys got back to us talking about it being an index fund, mm-hmm. But also you look at it as a separate holding, the 25th largest investment that you have
right now. Why keep that the way it is, knowing what's going on?
Well, I think what ICE is doing was outrageous, right? ICE doesn't only contract with Palantir, they contract with a whole lot of other companies, right? You saw the other day in New York City, people occupied Hilton Hotel because they rent rooms to ICE, Microsoft, Amazon, you go down the long list of companies that have relationships with the federal government and with ICE. So if you suddenly felt you had to invest from everything, I'm not sure what we would have left, right? So you're absolutely right. We are invested in that particular company through passive investment, through index funds, right? So we replicate the broad indexes, and that way we can do that investment in-house, very low to no fees because we're doing it in-house. When you have $300 billion and you're going to be in the public markets, there are very few public companies that we don't have an investment in, because that's what you do. You invest broadly in the marketplace. A lot of folks want to pick and choose, not just on Palantir, depending on whatever the issue is in a given time.
You bring up Israel, obviously the foreign bonds.
Right, Israel, which is different because a bond, it's not a stock,
okay. Yeah.
or sure. A fossil fuel company or whatever.
I was talking about people questioning.
Yeah, people question everything all the time.
Yeah.
But it's very interesting. When I first got the job, people said, "Well, does he have enough investment experience?" And most people don't ask me to invest; they ask me to divest, right? If we divested from everything, how would we be making any money, right? So in the case of Palantir, as a specific, we have engaged with the company. We're very concerned about human rights violations. I joined with fellow treasurers and controllers from across the country, writing to the Trump administration, being outraged by what's been happening in Minnesota, and indicating that that is having a negative impact on the overall economy and well-being of this country. So we've called out the abuse, but that particular company does a lot of other things too, right? So they have other kinds of contracts. They have contracts in the past with Centers for Disease Control, the Center for Missing and Exploited Children. So they're not a company that's only focused on that one particular contract. And so when I say we're funding ICE, we're not funding ICE. ICE is a federal agency, so our position is, because when we didn't pick to be in Palantir, it is part of the index fund. We have a lot of things in the index that maybe I wouldn't personally choose, but this is not my personal stock portfolio. So our commitment is to the retirees, and you can't and you shouldn't run the fund as a political soapbox, right? I can speak as loudly as anybody about how outrageous it is what's happening in Minnesota, and I do. And see Americans getting killed and everything. I mean, it's just totally unacceptable. And even you're starting to see the federal administration and Trump back off of what they've been doing. But it's outrageous. But that's a separate question from how we manage our investments. And look, if you want us to be an active manager and pick and choose stocks all the time, I think that would threaten the strength of the pension fund, which has been a very strong asset, not just for our retirees, but for all of New York State. If we suddenly become stock pickers and day traders, I think that would be the end of the kind of strong pension fund that we have. So we are engaged with that company. We are letting them know we're concerned about human rights violations. We didn't pick them as a stock. It's part of the index fund. You mentioned it's a large, well, you know what? It's one of those companies that has gone up in value because they have all kinds of contracts with all kinds of entities, and obviously they have been profitable, which is why they're part of the index.
I think I've heard you say, not you said right now, we don't want to do this based on politics. I've heard others say that as well. But would there be a case where it's based on morals and human rights and things of that nature, in terms of, I know you don't want a stock pick, but if it crosses a certain line, would that be time to reconsider?
It might, but then you would have to evaluate what would be the impact on the fund, right? So as an example, we divested from gun manufacturers, right, after the shootings in Connecticut and Sandy Hook, which happened on school property, right? And school employees were among those victims, the children. It was a terrible story. We have many school employees in our pension fund. And I said to the staff, we from a moral perspective, we really need to look at this, and do we really want to be making money from gun manufacturers? Well, we looked at it, turns out we had very little. It just wasn't a big part of the portfolio or any of the indexes. I think it was about 14 million, maybe something like that, which on a multi-billion-dollar fund, hundreds of billion-dollar fund, it's nothing. So we did put a divest, or in effect restriction, buy no more. I would say that was a smart financial decision, because I think long-term gun manufacturers are not the best place to put money. There's a lot of liability, and a lot of court cases come out of some of these shootings. But before we did that restriction, we did an evaluation, and because it was a small amount of money, it didn't have any impact on the financials of the fund. We put a restriction on, it was active management, right? Not in the index fund, on Exxon. We feel Exxon, as a fossil fuel company, falls short of our expectations on dealing with the issue of climate change. So although it remains in our indexes for the reasons I said earlier about index investing, but we put a restriction on our active management, where we did have some active management of those funds, because we felt that was the good business thing to do. Some may say dealing with climate is part of a moral issue as well. But that was a case where we felt we could take a step, but it would not undermine our basic strategy of having a broad investment in the marketplace with reputable, in terms of their profitability, with companies that are in the indexes, so we can secure the retirement. So it's always a balancing act, and I'm not unmindful of the fact that we're a public fund and we need to look at some of these questions, but you can't just knee-jerk whenever there's an issue with a particular company in a given week and say, oh, Lord, I don't like that, let's just walk away. Because you also lose your leverage. So you take the case of the company we're talking about. Don't you think it might be more effective for investors? And by the way, we're not alone or unique in this. New York City's funds are in Palantir. State teachers are in Palantir. California, look at all the big states, because it's a company that is listed and is profitable. So what we're all trying to do is press the company to say, what are you doing there? How are you dealing with the issue of human rights? Really raising the question of whether they should be involved with these contracts. You lose that leverage if you totally divest. So there's nothing unique about what we're doing in New York, but that's not stopping us from raising our voice in outrage to what the federal government is doing. They've made ICE into a military presence in what has been a wonderful city of Minneapolis and tearing that city apart. That's not acceptable. If we can make it go away by selling our stock in Palantir, maybe we would, but that's not going to change anything. It may make people feel better, but it's not going to change anything.
When it comes to foreign bonds, would you apply sort of that same mindset to investing, divesting in the state of Israel?
Well, Israel bonds have been a part of the portfolio many years before I became controller. It's a part of our fixed income portfolio, a small part of it, but it's a part of it. Contrary to what the critics say, it's been safe and reliable return, never defaulted on the bonds. It's been part of fixed income portfolio. And as you know, having nothing to do with the issue of the war in Gaza, there's been a big movement to divest from Israel.
Yeah.
Boycott, divestment, and sanction, BDS movement. We in New York have had a very clear policy against BDS, against Israel, and that hasn't changed. So as a fiduciary, totally defensible. And again, it's not taking a position on the administration, the government that may be in place right now in Israel. You know where we have our biggest bond holdings? Not in the hundreds, but in the billions. I think what, 22 plus billion. It's in U.S. Treasuries. When we purchase U.S. Treasuries, are we endorsing Donald Trump's policies? I can assure you that I did not support Donald Trump. I do not support Donald Trump.
You're a Democrat.
I don't support his policies. So when we are investing in U.S. Treasuries, we're not endorsing the U.S. administration, but we know that that's a smart place to put money, a safe place to put our fixed income. So I think people conflate when we do that investment with an endorsement of a particular policy. But I think people should not be naive. There was a movement. We could argue whether the movement makes sense or not. I don't think it does. But there was a movement to divest from Israel for whatever the agenda that is part of that. But New York State has law against BDS. We have a policy from the investment perspective against BDS. And I think we should all be thankful that the ceasefire seems to be holding in Gaza. And we certainly hope this next phase will be successful. What happened on October 7th in Israel was horrendous. Those pictures and images we saw in the response to October 7th was happening in Gaza, especially to children, was horrendous. It's a bad situation. There's been a bad history there for a long time. But that is a bit beyond what we do in terms of when we choose to have a bond like that.
But money talks. Should you consider just to make a statement here, to say we're standing up for something we believe in? Or I know that that's political, and obviously that goes very far in one direction, but you mentioned the U.S. Treasury, Trump administration, state of Israel. Would it be worth to say, no, if you're going to continue with these policies, we are going to make this statement?
I wish I could have the luxury of having my political views be reflected in how we invest the money. I can't do it. I have 1.2 million New Yorkers who depend on our financial decisions. I don't like Donald Trump, but I'm not going to sell U.S. Treasuries because I don't like Donald Trump, because I know that's the safest place for us to put our fixed income money. I know we're getting the return we expect, from Israel bonds. So to go back on that doesn't make sense from a fiduciary perspective. And I'll just say this: October 7th triggered a horrible, horrible thing. October 7th was an attack on Israel, and sometimes people lose sight of that horrible day and what happened that day, and the consequences of it. I think shows that whoever made that decision to invade Israel and do those terrorist attacks, the consequences were horrible for everybody. And whether it's setback peace forever in that part of the world, I don't know. That's a bit beyond my pay grade. But having been to the Holy Land over the years, when you think of all three major religions, that area just being the wellspring of inspiration for faith, that should be the most peaceful place on this planet, and just the opposite. So I wish I could tell you that what the New York State Pension Fund is going to solve all the problems of the world. It's not, but I'm going to make sure we have the money there to pay my retirees' pension benefits. That's my job.
I did want to get to the state budget, but I don't think we have time for that. But so you're going to have a report, I imagine,
Yep.
Pretty soon here?
And, our concern is not just budget balance for the coming year, not just how we deal with the federal cutbacks that are going to affect us in a host of areas, but how will we have budget balance moving forward? Because we have more money than we expected, right? Wall Street's been doing really well, getting back to the Wall Street question.
Yeah.
So the revenues have been coming in much higher than expected. The governor has a very clear set of priorities on the affordability agenda, which I think the legislature is very interested in, childcare, some other issues. So I'm concerned that the balance be not just for the coming year, but those out-year budget gaps. What decisions are being made today to reduce those out-year budget gaps? Because I think that's an important issue for New York State to deal with.
But the cities.
And for the city as well.
The city's
city
got
as well.
a whole different situation.
But it's also similar.
Yeah.
Revenues coming in higher than projected, less of a direct impact, but federal cutbacks are going to affect them as well. We had always indicated over the years that the city had been under budgeting for certain risks that we identified, and the mayor adopted the number that we put out and the city controller put out. And it's really a worst case scenario, but the city has some real issues to deal with as well. And what the state decides to do and how will that impact on state aid to the city is also going to be an issue that the city has to deal with as well.
Well,
all local
Cup Day's
governments.
Wednesday.
Yeah.
We'll see how that goes. Finally, obviously, as you build up to this primary, we talked about at the beginning, why you're still here. But if you would like, last few thoughts, as we head into over the course of the next few months, what you want to bring to this office, if elected moving forward, as you continue now, as you would break 2 decades, right, in office in 2027.
And I still wouldn't be the longest serving controller, by the way, even if I get another term. The controller's office has always been a source of stability when someone is there doing a good job. We just came out of the Syracuse convention. I had 90% of the vote, so I think it was a strong validation of the work I've been doing by the Democratic Party. We'll see if there'll be a primary. They've got a petition. Nobody got enough to qualify, so who knows what's going to happen. I think a good track record and a steady hand is very much what's needed moving forward. I think we're going to continue to put a priority on looking at the consequences of the changed relationship between the federal government and the state. What will be the implications of the cutbacks in federal programs? We talked a lot about healthcare earlier, but education, energy, nutrition, and how do we navigate that? We had our series of reports on New Yorkers in need, looking at housing costs, looking at food insecurity, looking at child poverty, continuing to look at, while this economy by and large has been strong, not everybody's benefiting from it. So making sure that those that aren't benefiting are getting appropriate attention. We've had a series of reports on various issues affecting the rural communities, because I think too often in New York, rural communities rural issues don't get the full attention they should get. So healthcare in rural communities, agriculture, what's the impact of the federal policies? We just put out a report about that. Looking at the age spectrum, we've had a series of reports and audits on services to older New Yorkers. We also did a report recently on the challenges for younger New Yorkers. Why are we losing some of them? Obviously, housing costs, student debt burden, the impact of AI, which is starting to be felt in terms of fewer entry-level jobs available. So what will that mean in terms of how do we retool the economy to make sure that we're providing through our community colleges and colleges and universities the preparation to give our young people the talents and skills they need to, in fact, have access to the jobs that will be available. So being timely in terms of what we're looking at in terms of issues, and obviously the ongoing work of investing in the pension fund, making sure retirees are secure, and the audits, the accountability agenda. All of that's very, very important. Other issues that people or priorities people don't realize that we're involved with, the college savings program, the 529 program, we manage that. That does very well. The ABLE program, letting people with disabilities have greater financial independence, and doing more innovative strategies with those kinds of efforts as well. Returning people's lost money, getting more money through unclaimed funds back in people's pockets. So part of it's an ongoing agenda, but a lot of it will be adjusting to the challenges of today. And again, because I have a proven track record of delivering results, of putting together a good, strong team, and doing it with honesty and credibility and integrity, I think that's the formula for success for the next 4 years, and why I'm confident that I will be the Democratic nominee again, and we'll see what happens in the fall when the Republicans choose their candidate.
Tom DiNapoli, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. We appreciate it. You can always find us on our Power and Politics podcast page. Just search Power and Politics CBS 6 wherever you get your podcasts. It is free. Subscribe and like and give us a rating today so that way we can continue to grow and talk to more of the people that you want to hear from here on Power and Politics.